In this video, I'm going to add ambient occlusion to onto our birdhouse that we made previously, and then I'm going to also discuss the upload parameters to Secondlife a little bit. So let's split the screen here, hit yeah, and go into the UV editor. Have to select all, Smart Unwrap, and specify an island margin of 0.01. I think he actually explains what that value is for. Yeah, to reduce bleed from adjacent islands, right, in the area weight of 1.0. And I'm not sure exactly how that comes into effect, but we just pick OK. And the island margin moves these guys apart a little bit better, and as we'll see in a second, you need that when you have color problems, where this is going to be blue and that's going to be yellow, and if they were jammed together we can have bleed over issues. So let's create and give it an image file. And pick OK. Now we're going to do the ambient occlusion. We'll go into the world settings, pick ambient occlusion, set the factor to 0.4. Can tinker around with that. Go into that little scene guy, down to bake, and pick ambient occlusion and bake. Right, and there was the problem where the bleed over would have occurred right there. The weight factor gives it an appropriate weights for the sizes of the areas here versus here, such that our little peg here, or perch, would be an appropriate size based on the entire area, as opposed to being much bigger and wasted. Alright, so now what we can do is we can demonstrate that we can actually paint on this material. Let's go into textured solid, and if we go in here and say paint, and let's just drag the mouse across here, and we can see that it shows up there. Alright, so now let's use the left and right bracket buttons. They're up near the P key in the top right hand side of your keyboard to make it smaller so that we get a reasonable size. We could demonstrate that we can, I think this is the bottom of the birdhouse, I believe. Let's check. Yep, there it is. So we will Control Z out of there. And now we can do is we can get I'm using a graphics input tablet here now. Alright, so we have there. Now if we export this thing to Collada, we don't have any modifiers on this one. Doesn't hurt to click it, selection only, and do and include UV textures. And save it. I'm going to cancel. I've already exported a bunch of times. Go into Secondlife, build, upload, mesh model, and pick our birdhouse. Alright, and none of the above. Now let's talk a bit about these settings here. When you res an object that you used, that you created in mesh, as you move away from the object, you'll see it distorts. Okay, you see the birdhouse on the left distorted, and distort it again. And apparently there are 4 levels of detail, 4 separate levels of detail represented by these 4 different sets of values. And so what you can do is you can, a couple ways you can deal with this thing. You can specify a higher number here under the number of triangles and pump those numbers up to eliminate the jumps that you get, the distortion jumps. What that'll do is that eliminates those problems, but it'll also cause another problem, and that is that the object that you're going to upload is going to raise the cost of it. For instance, if I do a calculate fees here, we'll get 11. If I use the level of detail above, and then calculate fees again, surprisingly it's going to be cheap to upload this one. There it goes up a little bit. And it'll also, what'll happen is you'll also find that the land impact will go up when you res it. So again, that's one of the mechanisms to deal with that, is to just punch those numbers up and then reach a happy medium that makes you happy. Another mechanism that you can do is you can pick load from file. Alright, what happens when you do a load from file, what is going on there? And that is, if you go back into Blender, let's close this window and kind of demonstrate it here. If you were into go into vertex mode, if you create this birdhouse with much less complex topology of it, so if you were into we pick, say, this vertex and this vertex, to Alt-M at last, and did the same thing here, Alt-M at last, Alt-M at last. You can see we have less detail, less complex environment. Do that all the way around, and then maybe even take this, as you saw when we built this originally, what we did is we made this little black hole here to give the illusion of a nice hole in our object. Do is delete that entire face, or those set of faces there, and then make it a single face, and then just paint that on, as we saw earlier, as a black spot there. And the end result would be that it would be a much less complex object. Then you would export this separately into a separate collada file, and then specify from file and use that for this next level of detail below, and that would give you a less complex object, fewer vertices, but the basic shape would be this correct, or wouldn't be distorted, as we saw when we backed out on this one, that it right there, the one on the left, if you can see, it's pretty small depending on what kind of screen you have, but you can see that it's no longer got a flat roof on it because it distorted it right there when it jumped, right? Yeah. And so if we just cut the number of vertices in it, it would, we'd lose the detail that we've got around the of the roof there, that extra little edge, but you wouldn't get distorted as badly. So that's the whole messing around with that. And I strongly suggest that when you're doing experimenting like this, that you use the test grid, since they don't charge you for uploads for items at the test grid. Well, actually they charge you, but as you can, when you first sign up for the test grid, they take our formula, I don't know how it is, and they give you that many lindens, and that stays that amount over there. They're totally separate environment in the test grid than it is in the main grid. And if in fact if you run out of lindens in the test grid because you've done so many test uploads, you can do a little shenanigan where what I've done is I have an alt. I gave all my lindens in the test grid to my alt on the test grid, and then I changed my password on the main account, the main password, and then change it back, and about 3 or 4 days later all of the money in my main grid gets transferred, plus all the inventory is updated and sent over to the test grid. And so say if I had 15,000 lindens, I don't know what I have in the main grid, but it would show up as 15,000, and then I get my alt to transfer all that money back, and you could build in a phenomenal amount of money. But again, it does take a few days after you've done the change the password and change it back. And what we're staring at right now is we're staring at 2 versions of the birdhouse, one with and one without ambient occlusion, and you can see the subtle differences between the birdhouse without ambient occlusion and the one with ambient occlusion. And if I move the camera up there, we can see how it showed up when I had painted on the bottom of the birdhouse. Alright, so hopefully that clarifies the upload information. Oh, one other tidbit is back to the test grid versus the main grid. You can also sign up for Avenation, and they don't charge at all for mesh uploads there, so you could experiment around and do lots and lots of test uploads of your mesh objects in Avenation test grid, and find out, get all the stuff like we were doing for that build where we would change the upload from file and stuff, and you could do many different copies of the thing and experiment with it without ending up costing you a lot of lindens and whatever. So if you enjoyed this video, like me on the thing, and if you have questions, make sure you go ahead and put them in there, and see you on the next video. Thanks for watching.